Welcome, everyone. Thank you guys for joining us for this month's Discover Tennessee History webinar. We are really excited to offer the second in this year's series. Our presenter today is Christopher Grissom with the Tennessee State Museum. Before I turn things over him to get to the good stuff for today, a couple of quick reminders. First, for those of you joining us live, please be sure to keep your mics muted. We are recording this for folks to view later on as well. If you are joining us live, make sure that we see your first and last name so we can chat with you, know who it is that we're talking with. And of course, we do like for these sessions to be interactive, so feel free to open up the chat box, introduce yourself, ask questions. Make comments. We will be monitoring that throughout the session for those of you joining us live today. For this series, and this is, I believe, if I remember correctly, like the third year that we've done this. So we have a Padlet where you can find all of the information, including resources from past sessions and including today's session. So you have the link here as well as a QR code to access that. And we'll share this again at the end of the session. So if you miss it now, don't worry, we'll share it again towards the end. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Chris, who is going to talk with us today about the Trail of Tears.
All right. Thank you very much. And what we're going to do today is, first of all, introduce myself. My name is Chris. I'm with the Tennessee State Museum. I'm the K-12 education manager here. So if you have done anything education related, I have somehow involved with that in one way or another. If you guys wouldn't mind in the chats, just kind of saying hi and letting me know a couple of things. I wouldn't mind knowing what grade level you teach if you're in a classroom, and what county, what area of the state you're from. That gives me kind of an idea of where we're serving, and if we have any local connections, I'll try to make those as well. But that'll help me kind of get an idea. But like Kira said, we've been doing the teacher workshop that we've done for or professional development that we've done this past summer. We really wanted to look at ways where social studies, historical thinking skills really overlapped with basically other subject areas, including science and reading and language arts. So we kind of put something together that shows how these skills will overlap with each other and how you can use them kind of cross-curricular in a cross-curricular way. But we also wanted to do it in a way that could be really applied to just about any history topic. So that's what we did. And we chose the topic of Cherokee removal and the Trail of Tears as our topic to use as an example. But ideally, the things that we're going to be doing today are going to be things that you could apply kind of across the board with any other topic you might be handling in your classroom. Now, I will say this is something that we did over basically a 6-hour day over the summer. And, we've got about 45, 50 minutes here, give or take. So I'm going to try and do a balance of hitting some content, introducing you guys to content and getting maybe a little deeper into the story, especially if there's anything you were interested in knowing about Cherokee removal and others, but also kind of describing at least one way you could use this in your classroom as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll jump straight to it. At any time during any of this, you guys feel free to throw questions in the chat box. I'll make sure to have that up and keep an eye on it. That way, anything you want to know, we can kind of make this a little bit of a discussion as well. But like I said, ideally, I assume everybody can see that. But we are going to be looking at Cherokee removal and tie in a little bit to the Trail of Tears. And we're going to also be looking at some primary sources as well. Well, mostly primary sources today. So we'll work our way through. I'm going to skip a few things here and just kind of jump to it. So as far as framing this, I want to look at it first of all as if historians were scientists. So let's take a look at it from a scientific point of view, kind of work our way through the scientific method a little bit. And the first thing we need is a question. You have to pose a question in science. So we started with this one. What factors led some Cherokee leaders to choose to sign the Treaty of New Echota while others did not? Now, what we have done with our teachers throughout in our full day workshops is we then actually have them kind of take this to the next step in the scientific process and actually write a hypothesis. So, and if you ever have used a KWL chart, this also can act as the K part of that. What do your students come to you already knowing about this? If you know what the Treaty of New Echota is, why would some of the leaders have signed this, and why do you think some didn't? I'm actually going to ask anybody who wants to go ahead and throw a theory into or a hypothesis into the chat box if you'd like to share with the rest of us what you think. But I would have the students, one way you could do this is have the students divided up into groups. We actually gave our teachers big post-it notes and had them write their hypothesis on that, and then we posted them around the room. And what we are going to do is, as we continue to study and look into this topic, trying to answer this question, repeatedly allow the students to go back and make adjustments to their hypothesis. And like I said, at any time, if you guys want to play along, feel free to throw that in the chat as well. But after we get our hypothesis, the students have theirs kind of posted around the room. Everybody can see what everybody else came up with. We can go through that, discuss it. You know, why did you answer or why did you come up with the one that you did? What leads you to believe that? What information do you, like I said, do you already have as you're starting this? All right. One hypothesis, some people saw the writing on the wall, decided to leave, settle early, kind of seeing how things might turn out ahead of time, thinking that there's not much option, right? That's definitely a good one. Now, of course, if you have no idea what the Treaty of New Echota is, this question becomes a little harder to answer. And, you know, in your classrooms, obviously you would know where you need to start with your students if you need to give a little information ahead of time. I'm not going to make it that easy on you guys today, though. So create that hypothesis, answer that question. So try to come up with an answer and why you think that. That's kind of the key part of this. Don't just throw out an answer and say, that's what I came up with. So you want to know why you think that. Possibly private negotiations, maybe there was a benefit, right? So signing the treaty, some kind of, whether it's personal or to the tribe as a whole, tribal nation as a whole, there could be some benefit there. Well, once you get your hypothesis and you've placed them around the room in the scientific process, next thing you've got to do is experiment or gather data. Now, we're not going to do this the same way you would in science class. I'm not going to break out the beakers and the test tubes and stuff. We're going to do it as historians. The later ones may have put their hope in Worcester versus Georgia. I agree with both of those based on what you already know. All right, excellent. Great. So we have our hypothesis, and again, got to test it, right? You got to gather more information. So for us as historians, there's really two main ways to gather information: primary and secondary sources. And we are going to dig into primary sources first. Now, again, in the classroom, I have packets, which on that Padlet that we gave the link out for. If you go in there, there is actually a collection of primary sources dealing with answering this question. We created the packets and actually handed them out to the groups, and we would allow the students to go through these primary sources on their own as a group, discussing it and on their own first and trying to draw their own conclusions about this. What we are going to do, there's the link there. What we are going to do today, I'm just going to run you through them. Again, we've got limited time, and students would be able to make notes on this. We actually have a sheet that we came up with to help organize their thoughts as they're going through and looking at these primary sources. And you can see here, it's really designed as kind of a chronological style of notes. But we are going to, I'm not going to do that. We're going to actually just go through them kind of collectively here, and I have arranged them chronologically. So a couple of these are going to be legal documents. We are going to look at the actual Indian Removal Act, the Treaty of New Echota itself, Worcester versus Georgia, somebody brought up. We'll look at that Supreme Court decision a little bit. And then we're going to look at a few others that I've mixed in that really do try to tie into answering this question. So, Indian Removal Act, this is signed in May 28th, 1830. I'm also, since I'm with the Tennessee State Museum, going to drop in some times where Tennesseans play a major role in this. So obviously, Indian Removal Act is going to be signed in under President Andrew Jackson from Tennessee. And to be honest, just because of its title, a lot of students come to us with a misconception of really what this does as far as the Indian Removal Act. It does not remove Native Americans. The Indian Removal Act does not force Native Americans to leave in and of itself. And you can see here in Section 2, that first section that's highlighted, that it basically says that it shall and may be lawful for the president to exchange any and all of such districts so to be laid off and described with any tribe or nation of Indians now residing within the limits of the states or territories. So that's really what this is doing. It is authorizing the president, which again at this time is Andrew Jackson, to negotiate the trade of lands west in the territories with land that Native Americans have that the United States is considering inside state boundaries. So this is just going to allow the president to go ahead and make those negotiations and offer those trades. In Section 3, you can see that it even swears that the president solemnly is going to assure that the tribe or nation with which the exchange is made, that the United States will forever secure and guarantee them and their heirs and successors the country so exchanged with them. So, promise, if we exchange this land, that's it. You're going to have that land. It is yours to do with what you want, all the way through your heirs and forever and ever. And of course, as we all know, that worked out very well. So if you're going back to looking at that hypothesis of why people might have signed it, we said saw the writing on the wall. Also, hey, this law this law puts that in there, that they promise that this is it. Once they give us this land, they're done. It'll be ours. So maybe if they believe this section of the Indian Removal Act, then maybe that is a benefit to signing the treaty, possibly. I will say, talking about Tennesseans tied into this, the chairs, the head of the Indian removal, basically the committees on Indian affairs in both the House of Representatives and the Senate in the United States Congress were both headed by Tennesseans, John Bell in the House and Hugh Lawson White in the Senate. So when we say the Indian Removal Act, it was written primarily by Tennesseans and signed by a Tennessee president. So Tennesseans are going to play a major role in this. And at any point, like I said, throw some questions in at the end of the chat. Yay, Davy Crockett. I see you saw down there. Davy Crockett is the only Tennessee congressman to vote against it. Every other Tennessean in the House and both of our senators did sign the Indian Removal Act. All right, so not too long after this is signed, Andrew Jackson gives his speech to Congress on Indian removal. He kicks it off as a big victory here. It gives me pleasure to announce to Congress that the benevolent policy of the government steadily pursued for nearly 30 years in relation to the removal of the Indians beyond white settlements is approaching to a happy consummation. Happy consummation may depend on your perspective there, but he's not exaggerating when he says steadily pursued for nearly 30 years. It has been official state policy by this point for the United States to remove Native Americans west since basically James Madison was president. Now, the United States did not have this at the top of their priority list, and they didn't pursue it very quickly until the late 1820s and throughout the 1830s. And we'll talk a little bit later about why that may have sped up. But it was official United States policy. And you can see down here, he says exactly, or he at least is laying out a political reason as to why he is doing this, and why it would benefit the Native Americans. It will separate the Indians from immediate contact with what settlements of whites, free them from the power of the states, enable them to pursue happiness in their own way and under their own rude institutions. It will retard the progress of decay, which is lessening their numbers, and perhaps cause them gradually, under the protection of the government and through the influences of good counsel, to cast off their savage habits and become an interesting, civilized, and Christian community. Any words or terms from his speech jump out at anyone? Now, this is one thing. Jackson a lot of times is portrayed as kind of rough and tumble, benevolent policy there, jumping out, and you know, for good reason as well. But he was a politician. He is framing this in a way that is going to look like a positive for Native Americans. So he is going to do that. He is also kind of taking some liberties with some civilized community, pursuit of happiness, reference to the Declaration of Independence. Absolutely snuck that in there. He is also purposefully misinterpreting some laws when he says free them from the power of the states. We're going to see in just a little bit whether or not they actually are under the power of the states at this point. Savage habits, yeah, that one really jumps out as well, such as more rights for women. It's also very paternal, you know, with the protection of the government and the influences of good counsel, the Native Americans will be able to become civilized. So it is has a very paternal attitude towards it as well. All right, so Worcester versus Georgia, 1832, a couple of years later. The Cherokee Nation, it's described basically Samuel Worcester, who you can see in the image there. He is a missionary, white missionary, who has been allowed to live in Cherokee land. The Cherokee have granted him permission to come in and live in their land, and he's preaching. He's out spreading the word. But the Cherokee have control over that border. If white settlers want to come in or want to live in that land, white families want to live in that land, they can do that with the Cherokee permission. However, Georgia has a law in the books that prevents that, says white people are not allowed to live in that land. So eventually, Georgia police show up, their version at the time, and they arrest him. So he sues Georgia, goes all the way up to the Supreme Court. And basically, what is ruled is that the Cherokee Nation then is a distinct community occupying its own territory with boundaries accurately described, in which the laws of Georgia can have no force. This is actually the second Supreme Court ruling in a row where the Supreme Court basically says, look, Native American nations exist. They are not part of states. So Jackson's saying, you know, we'll get them out of the state's control. According to the Supreme Court, they're not under state control. Georgia's laws do not apply to Native American land, and Georgia cannot pass laws to affect Native American settled land. And basically, they point to these treaties that have been there legally. Native American land has been defined, and there are borders that, you know, Georgia isn't allowed to cross, or any state for that matter. Also, it does kind of go into one of the earlier trials that the Supreme Court cases that the Supreme Court looks at, Georgia versus Cherokee v. Georgia, also says this basically that states cannot make laws affecting the tribal nations, but they also kind of go into, you know, they're not actually even allowed to negotiate. Native American nations are not seen as foreign nations. They're seen as domestic dependent nations, which is a term they make up specifically for this. But basically, any treaties, any negotiations that are done with Native nations have to be done by the federal government. State governments are not supposed to be doing that. The court ruled 5-1 for Rochester. That is not 9 justices. I've looked into this. One justice, that's only 6. One justice did recuse himself and didn't vote on it on this one. I don't know about the other 2. It seems like the last 2 justices, there may have just been empty spots on the court, which would make sense. 2 of the justices that were on this case were appointed by Andrew Jackson. One voted in favor of Worcester. One voted against. Was the one that voted against. by the end of his 2 terms as president, Jackson has actually will appoint 5 justices and have basically a 6th in line that are going to sit on the Supreme Court. So I believe the other 2 spots there were vacant at this point. But basically, the courts are siding with the Cherokee on this and their rights and upholding their rights versus the state of Georgia. We've got a letter from David Crockett here in December of 1834, which, by the way, guys, if you ever want to give your students a grammar exercise and have them correct someone's grammar, anything by David Crockett is absolutely going to work for this. He is terrible at spelling, capitalization, and grammar. So you can find all the mistakes you'd like. But as he says here, I have no doubt but that he thinks Andrew Jackson has the full power to transfer the people of these United States at his will. And I'm truly afeared that the majority of the free citizens of these United States will submit to it and say, Amen, Jackson done it. So Crockett here is taking a look at, and again, he's the only one to vote against the Indian Removal Act. So he's kind of giving us an idea of not just what he thinks Jackson is going to do, but how he thinks the public is going to react to it. He's afraid that a lot of the citizens of the United States are not only going to support the removal of Native Americans, but cheer it on. So he's given us kind of a look into what he believes is the broader support that this policy may have, even though he believes it's wrong. He even, and some of you may be familiar with this one as well. I've gone so far as to declare that if he, Martin Van Buren, is elected, that I will leave the United States, for I never will live under his kingdom. Before I will submit to his government, I will go to the wilds of Texas, which we know he does eventually do. So Crockett's giving us another look at this. So let's take a look. So Chief John Ross, now at this point, Crockett's letter comes in just at the end of 1834. So remember, Jackson, through the Indian Removal Act, has the authority to negotiate treaties with various Native American tribes, not just the Cherokee, but all of them. So what happens in 1835 is Jackson's administration is negotiating the Treaty of New Echota with the Cherokee at that point. So this is going to be the treaty that is trading land out west for the Cherokee's land that is east of the Mississippi. So that's going to happen in 1835. Now, there's going to be Cherokee leaders, kind of going back to our main question, are going to split a little bit here. There will be a few Cherokee leaders who will want to sign this treaty, while most do not. The ones that want to sign it become known as the Treaty Party of the Cherokee. John Ross, who is the principal chief of the Cherokee at this time, and the Cherokee National Council want to reject the treaty. So the leadership of the Cherokee, some of the other leaders, local leaders of the Cherokee, are kind of splitting here, and there's this back and forth. So as the treaty is being presented to the Cherokee, that's kind of the situation that comes. This is an excerpt from a newspaper in Tennessee, the Tennessee Journal in Athens, Tennessee. And basically, John Ross, as the principal chief of the Cherokee and the main voice against signing the Treaty of New Echota, he is arrested. Now, for those of you that know where John Ross lived, it's Ross's Landing is basically where Chattanooga is today. So he is actually arrested from Tennessee, but he's arrested by Georgians, basically kind of almost a home guard from Georgia. So this newspaper article describes what happened. It says that he has been arrested. He and a guest of his actually was arrested. Mr. Ross and his guest, we care not what the charge against Mr. Ross and his guest may be. He is a citizen of Tennessee under the protection of our law, and has been lately decided by the Supreme Court of the state, secured in his rights of person and the property by the Constitution and laws of the land. If he has been guilty of any offense against the laws of Georgia, why was he not prosecuted in the usual form? Why was he thus lawlessly seized without authority and in violation of the laws of the state? So basically, they're laying out saying, hey, look, he was not charged with anything that we know of. Georgians just came in across Tennessee's border and basically kidnapped a citizen of the state of Tennessee. And you can see in a letter down here as well that they quote that people came to John Ross's residence, which was within the chartered limits of Tennessee, arrested him and seized all of the public documents belonging to the nation, the Cherokee Nation, and have taken them off to Georgia. So basically, Ross just gets kind of hauled out of his house. Main documents and public documents that belong to the Cherokee are also seized and taken into Georgia. What this is really going to do is it's going to allow the treaty party time without Ross in the way. I believe he's in jail for about 2 weeks. He's going to be out of the way long enough for the treaty party to organize themselves and basically sign the Treaty of New Echota, which is signed by some Cherokee leaders in December of 1835. So right after Ross was arrested, basically. So it allows them a chance to get organized without opposition, and 14 of these Cherokee leaders are going to sign the Treaty of New Echota. So this is the negotiated treaty that will trade, like I said, Native American land for land west in the territories. And you can see here a little bit of what that does. The Cherokee Nation hereby cede, relinquish, and convey to the United States all of the land owned, claimed, or possessed by them east of the Mississippi River. The sum of $5 million to be expended, paid, and invested in the manner stipulated and agreed upon in the following articles. So they're doing this not only for land out west, but also the sum of $5 million is going to be paid to the tribe. And the rest of it is going to lay out what that payment is going to look like, the borders of the land that they are trading, and things like that. The treaty is very, very long, and there's a lot of technicalities in it. But ultimately, those phrases kind of really lay out what this treaty is doing. Now, Andrew Jackson, I will say, is not negotiating this treaty in person with the Cherokee leadership. It is actually being negotiated by William Carroll, who is the current governor of Tennessee at this time, and a good friend of Andrew Jackson's. So again, the Tennessean being involved here, aside from the fact that John Ross, the principal chief, who is opposing this, is also considered a Tennessean. All right. So we're up to the treaty. Are there any questions so far about any of this? I want to make sure to take a break and give chances for that. Now, was the $5 million actually paid? Actually, we'll talk about that a little bit later. Probably not all of it. What's going to happen about a year? Now, this treaty is also going to give the Cherokee Nation 3 years to move on their own. So this is signed in 1835. They'll have until 1838 to actually leave. So what's going to happen in 1836 or 1837 is Congress is going to pass a law that will ban direct payments from the U.S. government to Native American tribes. So what's going to happen is that $5 million is actually going to go into a trust, and the Cherokee will be able to petition the U.S. government for credits, and they'll have to say what they need that for. And the U.S. government will decide whether they get it or not. So directly, no, they're not just going to get a check for $5 million to use how they would like. The U.S. government will set that aside and dole it out as they see fit. So Major Ridge, he was a well-loved Cherokee leader, well-respected, long-time Cherokee leader, also actually born in the Tennessee area. He is the main leader of the treaty party. He is going to be the one that signs this along with his son and several others. So he's going to be the leader. Somebody asked the tone of the editorial. Did Georgia experience repercussions from the arrest of John Ross? Not that I can find. Tennessee never pressed the case of having people come in and just arrest folks with no authority to do so. From what I can tell, there was really no repercussions on Georgia for that. So Major Ridge, he signs the treaty and basically turns around and immediately gives a speech as to why he did this. So in his own words, I am one of the native sons of these wild woods. I have hunted the deer and turkey here for more than 50 years. I have fought your battles, have defended your truth and honesty and in fair trading. Basically, he does not want to do this. He doesn't want to sign the treaty. He doesn't like the treaty. But you can see a little further down, yet they are strong, the US government, and we are weak. We are few, they are many. We cannot remain here in safety and comfort. So those of you that said kind of the writing on the wall, there's maybe no way to win this fight. Any forcible effort to keep our lands will cost us our lands, our lives, and the lives of our children. So basically saying if we try to fight this, we lose the land anyway, and anybody who fights it is going to lose their lives. But the big thing that really jumps out at me is that next part, and the lives of our children. He is not talking about just literally the fight, if you were to take up arms to try and defend your land. He is saying that they would be wiped out. The tribe would be extinct at that point. So, the path is open before you. Make a treaty of cession, give up these lands, and go over beyond the great father of waters. Basically, sign this, and we may be able to keep our tribe, may be able to hold on to our culture. Not where we want it, but possibly the only way to do it. Now, John Ross, again, principal chief, he and the National Council, the Cherokee National Council, they basically have one last ditch effort to try and stop this. Being a treaty, the U.S. Senate still has to ratify it. It was signed by some people that did not have the authority to sign it, Major Ridge and others. But it's still got to be ratified by the Senate. So John Ross writes up a protest letter to be sent to the Senate, and goes and collects signatures from the Cherokee tribe. So you can see here. Now, John Ross, one of the reasons he was chosen and elected as a principal chief is he has spent a lot of time working with white governments, state governments, U.S. government, and he is very familiar with the way these governments work. So he lays out a legal case for this as well. The persons who are represented as acting in behalf of the Cherokee in this matter are wholly unauthorized. This is just an invalid treaty. He's saying, like, those people had no right to sign this, so you need to reject it because it's basically illegal. And the circumstance of a few individuals making a treaty vitally affecting the liberties, the property, and the personal rights of a whole people appears to be so utterly repugnant to reason and justice and every dictate of humanity that we come to the Senate of the United States with the full confidence that under such circumstances, the voice of weakness itself will be heard in the cry for justice. So you can see there, he makes a legal argument, but he's also going to hit that emotional note of this as well, that it's just wrong. Now, the thing is, the Cherokee Nation at this time is somewhere around 16,000 members strong. John Ross, when he collects signatures for this petition, he collects 15,500 signatures. That is most of the tribe, almost all of the tribe. So sometimes, especially in textbooks that have to gloss over this very quickly, it is presented as the Cherokee had a treaty party and the anti-treaty party, which were kind of evenly split. The Cherokee tribe was not evenly split on this issue. They absolutely were against this treaty. There were a few leaders who signed it. All right, a letter from John Ross. Now, I will say this about this protest letter. This was supposed to be read to the Senate. It would have been read out loud on the Senate floor just before the vote on whether or not to ratify the treaty. Right before this was about to be read, two of our senators got into a fist fight on the floor, caused a ruckus, and the Senate, not over this, just completely unrelated, got into a fist fight like you do on the Senate floor. And the Senate just went home for the day. They called it, said it's too crazy in here. We're done for the day. Everybody go home. They came back the next day, and the very first thing they did was vote on the treaty, ratifying the treaty. They did not ever actually read this protest letter out on the Senate floor the way that it was supposed to be done. So it is never read to the Senate. They vote directly on the treaty instead. Now, the treaty is ratified by the Senate by one vote. It passes by one vote in the Senate. So, who knows if reading this protest letter out would have changed one person's mind or not, but it was close. So John Ross, he's up there while this is happening in DC, and he writes a letter back to the tribe to let them know where we are. A spurious delegation in violation of a special injunction of the General Council of the nation proceeded to Washington City with this pretended treaty, and by false and fraudulent representations supplanted in the favor of the government the legal and accredited delegation of the Cherokee people. It comes to us not through our legitimate authorities. Our property may be plundered before our eyes, violence may be committed on our persons, even our lives may be taken away, and there is none to regard our complaints. We are denationalized, we are disfranchised, we are deprived of membership in the human family. This is how John Ross sums up the situation the Cherokee find themselves in. Now, if you guys in your class, we're going to ask your students to choose a tone for this letter. What are some words you think they might come up with to describe it? Depressed. Absolutely, especially there at the end. Resigned. Yeah. Indignant, especially at the beginning. Absolutely. So you're going to see angry, defeated, disappointed. One of our teachers one time said tired, and I can absolutely read that into this as well. So you can really kind of see a lot of emotion in these primary sources in some of these cases as well. Disgusted with the legal process. Yeah, he's like, there are none to regard our complaints. So he feels completely failed, yeah, by the legal process there. So that takes us through the signing of the Treaty of New Echota and the immediate reactions to it. Now, at this point, I would have the students go back through in their groups. You have now gathered information from the time period, from these primary sources. What changes would you want to make to your hypothesis, that one you wrote, and literally have them rewrite it or mark stuff out, add stuff to the hypothesis that they put up around the room. Like I said, these could have been posted throughout the entire time they were looking at this. So what changes would they make now that they've heard the words from the people that were there? Or none. Maybe their hypothesis is being proven correct. They're right on target. So this is an interesting way to kind of merge those two thought processes from the scientific method and looking at things through a historic lens. Now you can, this is where we kind of switched gears over the summer with our workshops. Secondary sources are another option. You guys as teachers are a secondary source. Textbooks, secondary source. Me talking to you as a secondary source. But if with students, we want to give them more information, and the great thing about a secondary source is you can frame things in ways to make them easier to understand. Primary sources, sometimes you can bundle them together and create a bigger picture. But John Ross is not going to be able to write about different perspectives other than his own, not with any authority. Same is true with Davy Crockett and all these others. But those historians, that's what they do when they write a book, when they create a speech that they give about these topics. They can choose a framing method that really makes these make more sense. So that's what we can do with our secondary sources to kind of look at this. And the framing method that we chose to use is a narrative. Read it like you would look at it and analyze it the same way you would a story that you would have in your classroom. So narratives have a theme, so you could tie a theme to this. Does anybody have a theme about Cherokee removal that we could use if it was, like I said, thinking in terms of a story? What would be a theme, something that universal message that we might could pull out of this? A theme of belonging, yeah. Belonging to a community, identity for sure. Pride, absolutely. We could definitely frame it that way. Betrayal. Yeah. All right. Got some good themes. Here's a quote from Dragon Canoe, possibly from Dragon Canoe, reflection. Yes. That I think I'll let you guys read through. But here's a quote from Dragon Canoe that can speak to some of this. Now, this is was attributed to him after the Treaty of Sycamore Shoals. So this is in 1775, way before the period that we're specifically looking at. But you can see it kind of echoes some of what we've seen through these other primary sources that we have looked at. Basically, the encroaching spirit of people moving into Cherokee land, and that he's saying it's not going to stop until everyone has to seek refuge in some distant wilderness. All right, so stories also have a setting. Setting's going to be very important to what's going on here. Now, this map, completely stolen from the book Jackson Land by Steve Inskeep. The map was created by Jeffrey Ward here, so just to give credit where it's due, but it is a great map to look at for this. This is the United States in 1812. So again, before we're talking about, but what I like about this map is it's going to show a difference in perspective. This one is labeled the white man's map. So you can see the various states on there, the territories and all those boundaries. But let's take a look at the Indian map, as it's labeled here, from 1812. So this shows Native American lands. And again, these tribal nations are using treaties, the borders that have been defined legally through treaties. This is what these are drawn out through. So you can see Tennessee does not look the same to Native American groups as it did to the state of Tennessee, the government of Tennessee and the United States government. For example, there's no West Tennessee over here. That is all Chickasaw land. Georgia, one of the reasons they keep popping up in this, according to Native American maps, Georgia is kind of a slim sliver of a country between South Carolina and Creek and Cherokee land. It is not that big. Some of East Tennessee is actually Cherokee land here. So you can see by looking at these two maps, Native Americans and the governments that they, from the various states in the US government, are really looking at different realities. They're kind of living in different places. That article from the Tennessee newspaper kept saying, hey, these Georgians came into Tennessee, kidnapped a Tennessean, basically, and hauled him off without due process. If you were to ask the Cherokee, they would say these Georgians came into Cherokee land, kidnapped a Cherokee citizen, not necessarily into Tennessee. But we're going to fast forward here as well to 1835, the period we are talking about. So this is the Cherokee Nation as it stands in 1835. So this is what the Treaty of New Echota is asking them to trade, to give up. All right. Stories have characters. Well, I mentioned earlier Jackson's speech. He says that, this has been a policy for the United States government for 30 years. And I kind of mentioned that it was kind of on the back burner. It wasn't a major priority for a lot of the U.S. government up until really about the time Jackson is taking office. And then it just speeds up. Everything starts to happen a lot faster. And it's not just because of Jackson himself, but take a look at who the leaders of the U.S. government were just from Tennessee during this time period. Andrew Jackson is the president from 1829 to 1837. The Speaker of the House between John Bell and James K. Polk, both Tennesseans, they are going to be the Speaker of the House from 1834 to 1839. The Senate President Pro Tem is a Tennessean, Hugh Lawson White, from 1832 to 1833. And Hugh Lawson White and John Bell, I mentioned earlier, they're the chairman of the Indian Affairs for both the House and the Senate in 1830. So what we see, and this is just Tennesseans, this is not counting Henry Clay in Kentucky and other Western leaders who are starting to come into power during this time. Well, if you look at our map here, you can kind of see why these Western leaders place a higher priority on Native American removal than Virginians maybe, or New England leaders, because they're surrounded by and butting up against these Native American tribal lands, unlike places like Virginia or New York or others. So this is going to be a much bigger priority, and it's one of the reasons you see this speeding up a lot during this period. All right, let's talk about the Cherokee side of this. You have the principal chief, John Ross, and the tribal. I'm going to go a little faster here because I know we're inching up on time. The tribal council against the treaty, you have people like Major Ridge, who, like I said, was a well-respected leader of the Cherokee on the treaty party. You also have Elias Boudinot from Tennessee, who is on the treaty party. That becomes kind of important because he is, just before this happens, he's basically started the first Cherokee newspaper, the Cherokee Phoenix, and the only Cherokee newspaper during this time. So you can imagine that if he wants certain news to get out there, if he has a particular slant, that may make its way into the newspaper. So he does control a certain amount of communication for the Cherokee people as well. Plot, what happens when, definitely important to a story. Here is a timeline of the various tribal removals since the Indian Removal Act is passed. That first dashed green line is the passage of the Indian Removal Act. Within a year, the Choctaw are being removed. A year after that, Seminole. 2 years later, Muskogee. That second dash line, that is when the Treaty of New Echota is signed by the treaty party. And you can kind of see where Major Ridge is coming from in that attitude of, hey, they're going to come and take this land anyway. Removal has already happened for several major tribes. And just after, you have the Chickasaw, and then in 1838, when the Treaty of New Echota's time limit ends, we'll eventually have the Cherokee removal as well. A few major events that kind of happen during this time period beyond the removals. Gold is going to be discovered in Cherokee land in 1829. This is going to cause a flood of people moving into Cherokee land. Indian Removal Act will be signed just after. If you'll notice the votes in the House, it passes 102 to 97. That is not overwhelming. It's not a massive landslide vote on the Indian Removal Act. The Senate, a little bit bigger margins here, 28 to 19. The Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, I kind of mentioned that a little earlier. That is where the Supreme Court describes the Native American tribes as domestic dependent nations, but they do have their own authority within their tribal nations. Worcester versus Georgia, we've already talked about by 1832. 1833, Georgia passes a law right after the Supreme Court says, hey, you can't pass laws about Native American land. That's outside of your purview. Georgia passes a law that declares it illegal for the Cherokee tribe to own land in Georgia. And they even institute a lottery and start giving away Cherokee land to white settlers. The federal government does not step in to stop them, even though the Supreme Court has declared that this would not be okay. No one from the federal government is going to stop Georgia on this point. So again, Treaty of New Echota is signed in 1835. 2 years before that, Georgia has just ignored the Supreme Court. The federal government didn't bother stepping in to protect the Cherokee. So you can kind of see why some of the Cherokee leaders may have felt defeated, that there really isn't another option. I mentioned that it is ratified by the Senate by one vote. 1837, I mentioned that earlier. Somebody asked, Congress does outlaw direct payments to the tribes. So before the treaty is actually even fully in effect, parts of it are being changed and altered. 1838, soldiers actually enter Cherokee land. Basically, some Cherokee do move out west voluntarily during this time period after the treaty is signed. Some hide and try to escape being removed. That is kind of where a lot of the Eastern Band in North Carolina today come from. But a lot of people, just out of protest, a lot of the Cherokee just don't believe the Treaty of New Echota is a real thing. It wasn't legal. So they just stay at their homes. So soldiers will eventually show up and force them out. They will be rounded up. You guys are probably very familiar with the history of the Trail of Tears. They will be rounded up into camps and organized and supplied, and starting in December of 1838, marched out west. In 1839, the treaty party are declared traitors. The signers of the treaty are considered traitors to the tribe. They are murdered. All of them within about 48 hours are killed. They are not tried and put to death through a court system. but none of them survived beyond that. And Major Ridge actually predicted that when he signed the treaty. He told some that he was basically signing his death warrant with that. So I think we're coming up pretty close on time. I definitely want to leave some time for any other questions. So that's two different ways we can kind of look at this. Now, again, with your students, you've gone through secondary sources. You've framed this as a narrative, looking at the main characters, at the action, at the setting. So it gives it something that they're familiar with to put this story in. So you can, again, go back to these their hypothesis. Now that they have the information, what do they want to say? Where are they going to fall on this? How will they answer that question we started with? Now, we do have some other things in the Google folder on the Padlet. You'll see a few other things. If you wanted to map this story out, like through a story map, we have a nice graphic organizer for you to use there with your students. You can pick some of those main characters and analyze them like you would characters from a story as well. And I'm going to go through that fast. And maybe if your students come up with different hypotheses, I'll go with that. You can have them debate if they know how to do that. If they know how to have a calm, kind of rational debate back and forth, you could have them debate the merits of the different thoughts and opinions they have on this. So I know I've moved kind of fast there towards the end, but I definitely wanted to leave time for anybody with any questions about any of the stuff we discussed, any of the activities, or any of the content. I explained it all so thoroughly that everyone understands everything about it. All right, well, excellent. This is a map for anybody who was curious. This is a map that we actually have in our collection from 1836, so right after the treaty is signed, that kind of lays out where the various Native American tribes are set aside land in the West, or what has been set aside for these tribes. So you can kind of see that there as well. Yeah, Marshall did a lot to build up the power of the court. Absolutely. He's definitely one of the main kind of architects of the modern Supreme Court. But yeah, and to end with a case where basically some of these rulings were not enforced at all by the executive branch is, yeah, kind of hurts the legacy there a little bit. Eighth grade, we talk about the necessary and proper clause, also manifest destiny. Absolutely, yeah, the necessary proper clause and manifest destiny can definitely tie into both of those with this story. And again, we basically just looked at about a decade from about 1829 to 1838 and just Cherokee removal. That is not the other tribes. Obviously, you guys don't have as much time as you would love to in your classrooms to drill down, but it's such an important story, but it highlights so many other things and ties into other things. And Tennessee was very involved, Tennesseans and Tennessee itself. I don't know how many of you are from areas that have parts of the Trail of Tears that maybe go through your town or in areas that used to belong to the Cherokee Nation, but you can definitely tie it into a lot of local history. If you guys are interested in any of our other resources, on-site field trips, virtual classes, traveling trunks, you can always find all of those on our website. We have lots of different things that are completely free that we offer to teachers and students to help you guys teach Tennessee history. So definitely take advantage of those if you haven't. Did Andrew Jackson's view of tribes impact the federal government's decision not to prosecute Georgia for passing illegal laws against Cherokee land ownership? Yes, it really did. Jackson was wanting to remove Native Americans, so he's not really going to jump in and make that harder. So a lot of times the story is often kind of framed as the Supreme Court, Indian Removal Act happens, the treaty for removal it's usually told where John Ross challenges the treaty and the Supreme Court rules in favor of the Cherokee, and Jackson says there's a famous quote that may or may not have been said, but Justice Marshall has made his ruling, now let him enforce it. That's an oversimplification. The Treaty of New Echota was actually never tested in court. John Ross did not actually challenge it in court. He challenged it through the petition to the Senate to try and prevent it from being passed. And Jackson didn't just flat out kind of say that once the decision was made. Where Jackson ignores the Supreme Court is basically by not stepping in when Georgia passes that law, which by the Supreme Court's definition would be illegal. So that's really where Jackson starts to ignore the Supreme Court. And by that point, the Treaty of New Echota is, like I said, almost signed. It has probably already been drafted. So yeah, Jackson's administration is not going to make removal harder by stepping in on against Georgia on that one. Great questions. Any others? All right, you can see some students using some of our resources, the virtual field trip on the far end there. Those are students in the classroom interacting with one of our educators at the museum virtually. Some students using some of the materials from our trunks and some on site for our field trips. If you guys want to stay up to date on the things the museum is doing, we have two ways to do that. The general if you just love the museum, want to keep up with everything that's going on there, we have a bi-weekly email blast, 3 stars, thousands of stories. You can sign up for that. If you're looking specifically for the more educational stuff, like when we open up our calendars for field trips and trunks, when we're going to post a new kids blog on Tennessee history topic, that is the weekly wrangle, and you can sign up for that, and we send that out, and that has more things geared towards educators and education. You can sign up for both of those through our website there as well. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing here. And unless there are any other questions, I'll definitely hang out and answer those. But I want to say thank you guys for hanging out and listening to me go on for an hour or so here. And thanks for your great comments and questions.
And I have just a couple of things to share as we wrap up. So again, just a reminder, the link for the Padlet, where you can find all the resources that Chris shared, can be accessed here. If you are interested in joining us for next month's webinar, we have the Tennessee State Library and Archive presenting a session on Tennessee's Constitution, Continuity, and Change. You can access information from that the web address here, which will include the link for registering for that session if you have not already done so, as well as information on all of the other sessions in this webinar series that will run through March. And then finally, if you're interested in receiving PD credit for participating in today's session or for watching this recording, you can do so via this link right here, or you can access it using this QR code. And we check that survey about once a week and send those out. So again, be sure to complete that. And then, for some reason you haven't gotten it, you can contact any of us in order to find out what's going on, and we'll get your certificates out to you. So with that, if there are no other questions for Chris, we will conclude today's session. And again, thank you everyone for your time, and we hope to see you again next month.